Thanks for attending. This research has been carried out by scholars and students of Universidad Nacional de Colombia. On behalf of the whole group, I will present today. Different forms of socialization and representation have historically produced gathering spaces. Such is the case of social clubs as spaces pursuing the integration of a given group around social, cultural, economic, sportive, or recreational activities, providing an improvement in social and mental well-being. In the mid-20th century, in different cities in Colombia, the consolidation of social elites gathered in such spaces, creating outstanding modern buildings. We understand that social clubs initially constitute a form of representation, while they evoke ways of inhabiting and socializing for the elites. Seeking to expand knowledge and ways of accessibility to these emblematic projects implies questioning the ambivalence they constitute as spaces for socialization and segregation. We have focused on 4 of the clubs designed by Oregon and Venezuela firm, one of the most prominent firms in the 1940s and 60s, made up of young Colombian architects. Stuart Hall states that representation is the ability to describe or evoke. Representation is a form of cultural cohesion insofar as it is constituted by common codes and meaning characteristics of the construction of identity, as they serve as resources for cohesion and segregation from others. This ongoing study, which has been carried out as a seedbed research with students from the undergraduate program in architecture and the master's degree in architecture, is carried out based on the original drawings and photographs of the projects, with the study of the historical context and with a discussion about key concepts. The development of the virtual exhibition has implied redrawing and complementing of graphical resources for the understanding and analysis of the projects, the synthesis of indicative and exploratory text, and the creation of digital model renderings to situate the reader in space. This presentation will reflect on how the built environment studies have also been challenged to enable new spaces of divulging the research outcomes by creating interactive platforms to visualize traditionally exclusive spaces where congregation and segregation intertwine. Innovative spaces and representation might enable new space experiences and increase the awareness of valuable buildings traditionally excluded from the canon. This presentation will first situate the cases of modernity in Colombia, followed by Oregon and Valenzuela as an architectural firm, social clubs as a category of buildings, the case of Oregon and Valenzuela, social clubs, new forms of research divulgation, to finally reach more than conclusions, preliminary reflections. In the 1950s, Colombia was known by the adjective, the country of cities, with more than 130 urban centers. The country underwent parallel industrialization and urbanization in the middle of the 20th century as in the rest of Latin America, perhaps with the particularities of its geographic diversity, social inequality, rural violence, and a short dictatorship. Colombia developed incipient industries in multiple cities as in the Andean region that took advantage of the country's strategic location. The economic policies implemented by the Colombian state attracted public and private resources. They stimulated economic growth, which triggered significant spatial transformation in the country's cities. According to Andrés Etter, cities expanded because of the integral migration due to rural violence, doubling urban areas in each decade between the 1950s and the 1960s, generating a balance with intermediate cities. The homogeneous growth that cities other than Bogota had until 1940s was accelerated first with cities such as Cartagena, Bucaramanga, and Manizales in the 1950s, and then by Cúcuta, Pereira, and Ibagué in the 1960s. With one of the first schools of architecture in Latin America, young professionals contributed to the orientation and consolidation of its urban and architectural development process. The growth of industries associated with construction, which required mechanized equipment and new types of building made out of iron, steel, and the disseminated use of reinforced concrete, exposed brick, and ceramic products, as well as the popularization of glass. According to the history of the Colombian Chamber of Construction, Camacol, the highest construction rates in the country were in the 1950s. While the state accelerated massive housing projects and infrastructure, private initiative expanded suburban areas and welfare and socialization services. As part of the desire of modernization in Latin America, which has been widely discussed by authors such as Nicola Miller, not only new ways of living were created, but also the incorporation of new social and cultural practices. Unlike other countries, in the case of Colombia, social clubs were established and built by affinity groups, the product of new elites generated by the incipient industrialization around socialization activities that selected recreation, wellness, and gathering. In 1944, the architects José María Obregón Rocha and Pablo de Valenzuela y Vega, trained in the Department of Architecture at the Catholic University of America, founded Obregón and Valenzuela Architects. Shortly after, joined by their fellow student and cousin Rafael Obregón González, who became the main designer. Years later, the studio was joined by younger professionals such as Hernando Tapia Azuero, Manuel Porero Delgadillo, Edgar Bueno Tafur, and Vicente Hernández Ramírez. Additionally, they had external advisors such as engineers Guillermo González Sopleta and Domenico Parma, and landscaper Jorge Riojo Hoshino. In June 1950, just 6 years after the founding of Obregón and Valenzuela, from now on B, Carlos Martinez dedicated the issue 36 of PROA journal to their work. On this occasion, Martinez affirmed that, quote, despite the firm's short operating time, it has achieved extraordinary results thanks to the development of projects that stood out for their attractive and innovative design, the careful choice of material, and the neat execution of in its construction, an architecture that, unquote, an architecture that he considered diaphanous and clear without the mystery or stylistic pretension in which the principles of modern architecture of European masters exiled in the United States were skillfully tailored to local conditions. With this team of professionals, OMB carried out audits, consultancies, and urban studies. In the same fashion, they participated in multiple competitions and executed private and public works, either individually or associated with firms such as Pisano Pradilla Caron, Ricardo Carrizosa Prieto in Bogotá, Vélez and Villegas Architects in Manizales, with the architect Gabriel Solano in Ibagué, and the engineer Alfonso Mejía Navarro in Barranquilla and Cartagena. They also carried out projects in other cities. Between 1949 and 1969, OMB built nearly 125 single-family homes. They also conceived 106 buildings and 13 urban complexes. OMB received direct commissions, and simultaneously they actively participated in private competitions. Their 4 social clubs and their study were designed in competitions. The Ibagué Country Club, 1954, the Rialto Club in Pereira, 1954, the Country Club of Bogota, 1956, and the Manizales Social Club, 1959. So let's see now the social clubs. During the last decades of the 18th century in Bogota, associations were formed where political, literary, and scientific issues were discussed, such as the Círculo Antonio Nariño, known as the Readers Club. In other social circles, such as the one named The Good Taste, individuals from the capital society assembled family and friends in their homes to share appreciations of culture, literature, and even to dance and have fun. From the last decade of the 19th century, the first social clubs emerged, located in downtowns such as the Gun Club and the Jockey Club in Bogota, and the Commerce Club in Bucaramanga, and the Manizales Social Club. Simultaneously, groups of friends interested in sports such as hockey, golf, polo, sailing, and fishing, practiced mainly by elites elsewhere, joined forces to acquire and condition land suitable for their practice. The Jockey Club, the Polo Club, the Muña Jazz Club, and the San Andres Golf Club and Bogota Country Club, among others, were then founded. Social life in Colombian cities during the 1940s and 50s was divided between activities typical of popular culture and those resulting from adapting European and North American customs. This is how the U and tourniquet fields, chicherias, and public squares alternated with elegant French-style theaters where operas and zarzuelas were presented, as well as modern cinemas. North American cinema was widely distributed during the 1950s, presented as a new model of life, so that little by little it gained strength and prominence. In the industrialized mass consumption society, opportunities for enrichment increase, and lineage faded to give way to economic clans in which fortunes of diverse origins were mixed. For its part, the rising middle class, made up of professionals, merchants, and business people who had accumulated significant fortunes motivated by access to status symbols and seeking social advances, changed their place of residence associated in exclusive clubs, and they began to attend etiquette meals, social gatherings, plays, everything necessary to install business life in their terrain, in a terrain similar to that of leisure and close to the ways of life of the upper class. This is how good part of the social events that were still held at home gradually moved to cabarets, nightclubs, and social clubs, as it was recorded in social sections of newspapers and magazines such as El Espectador and Cromos. The practice of sport, according to Fabio Zambrano, was a novelty among members of the traditional upper class, was brought to the nascent clubs with names in English, and constituted new spaces for the sociability of the local bourgeoisie. These clubs, generally located on the outskirts of cities and frequented by families to practice recreational and sports activities, differed from those located in traditional centers, where frequently exclusively men met to talk about politics and economic and make business deals. According to the registry carried out to date, approximately 150 identified business and recreational clubs have been built in Colombia during the 20th century. Between 1946 and 1965, Carlos Martinez published 14 of them in Proa Journal, 3 located in consolidated urban sectors and 11 in the periphery. The latter structuring as architectural ensembles that grew over time. Between 1949 and 1968, Obregón and Valenzuela, in association with local firms, conceived 9 clubs in Bogotá, Ciuté, Pereira, Ibagué, Cartagena, Manizales, and Armenia. Of these, Rialto Club, El Círculo Social, the Cartagena Club, Manizales Club, and the America Club were designed for large-scale properties located in downtown centers. Well-appointed and comfortable modern buildings replaced the narrow and uncomfortable clubhouses where the activities carried out by the gentlemen of the time were prioritized. That is why meeting rooms, dining rooms, bars, billiards, and game rooms destined for the event of political, literary, economic gatherings were expanded and complemented with a reception room, barber shop, bowling alley, swimming pool, Turkish bath, gym, among others, for the well-being of members. Buildings of 2 to 4 stories with a constructed area ranging between 2,200 square meters and 5,000 square meters are detached from the urban facing line and placed on an hermetic basement where services are kept. By doing so, members are protected from the curious gaze of pedestrians. Large access canopies and double-height voids mediate between the elevated lobby and the street. Balconies and windows carefully arranged to safeguard the privacy. In contrast, once above the street level, lounges, swimming pools, and dining rooms open up to the escape through large stained glass windows, terraces, and suspended gardens. Furthermore, OMB projected in the outskirts of main cities and as a team with other architectural firms, country clubs such as Muña Yacht Club, the Bogotá Country Club, and the Ibagué Country Club. 1- and 2-story buildings constructed in areas that varied between 800 square meters and 10,000 square meters were projected through terraces and well-kept gardens into extensive lands that could exceed 1,200 square kilometers. The heart of the country club was there. The artificial lakes for practicing water sports, extensive and well-kept golf courses, shooting and polo fields, numerous tennis and soccer, volleyball and basketball courts, stables and riding arena for exhibitions and equestrian training were some of the activities that motivated the meeting of friends and athletes for the creation of traditional and exclusive country clubs. In this case, the quality and extension of the courses, the coaches' exclusive origin, the sports venues' exceptional condition, and the comfort of their facilities became the status symbol that the associates yearned for. This is how architecture was partially relief of that commitment, giving rise to the landscape and measured buildings built with stone materials and in harmony with nature, arranged in relation to the sun, with wide open hands, courtyards, and shutters when the harsh weather required, with chimneys and skylights to heat and illuminate dining rooms and lounges, and with innovative structures to cover sport venues from rain and sun. While the clubs located in consolidated environments occupy compact headquarters in highly valuable sectors of the city, the recreational clubs developed in groups of buildings. They are arranged in wide extensions of land located in unpopulated areas with geographical attractions that allow the incorporation of the gardens as a device for relating to nature. Inside, the services are grouped and the structure is brought to the perimeter and made as slender as the technique allows to free up living rooms and dining rooms and integrate them into a single spatial entity in which it is possible to see and be seen. The buildings that make up the complex are frequently arranged around the pool or the area with most significant activity and accompanied by cropped gardens preceding a unique geography defined by the horizons towers where large windows and terraces project the interior space. The concavity that collects and congregates members around the space configures the place for meetings and exhibition. This concavity contrasts on occasions with the convexity of the access to the building, in which the inherent exclusion for those who met the particular requirements on an elite is manifested. The careful selection of materials used in the construction of clubs, the furniture for conditioning the spaces, and the incorporation of works of art frequently represent social codes. The measured use of marble and stone, the incorporation of large glass slats, terraces, low ceilings, and fixed furniture in wood, metal structures, and concrete set the stage in which modern furniture and steel and laminated wood seek fluidity from space. Carpets, curtains, partitions, and planters separate the spaces without dividing them and reflect the good taste associated with simplicity. This research was proposed during the isolation resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, it posed challenges for us to obtain information as much as its dissemination. This led us to reflect on the conventional forms that this dissemination of research on the analysis of architecture has had. From resources such as printed publications to what at the time were considered breakthrough to exhibitions in museum spaces and even to other spaces that have been adapted to allow physical installations. That's around the latter that we saw how the great museums began to generate virtual access that allowed awareness and experience of their collections and spaces even thousands of kilometers away. This implied expanding the audience or the regular public that attends these spaces, which particularly attracted us given the topic of study. This initially led us to consider the possibility of making a virtual exhibition as a resource of overcome our limited free mobility. It has also provided itself to other reflections. We hope to create a free, flexible, and autonomous access by making a virtual exhibition. Given the predominant condition of architectural representation and architecture itself, the virtual exhibition has a strong visual predominance. We acknowledge the limitation that persists in this regard. Still, it facilitates access without mobility restrictions, overcome logistical limitations such as timetables or location, and enables an autonomous sensory experience. This challenge also involves a process of reflection and creation, since it is different from the traditional medium for exhibiting architectural projects. The spirit of universal accessibility fundamentally seeks non-discrimination and equal opportunity access to different resources. Given that the results of academic research constitute new knowledge, we consider of interest that it can be accessible to a diverse population. The virtual sample on the analysis of the social clubs of OMB will seek to provide conditions of equality and autonomy as a parameter. It will therefore be sought that despite our scarce resources, the exhibition becomes a facilitating environment enabled for people with motor, communication, and organic disabilities. It will integrate services such as visual, audiovisual, and indicative resources to facilitate sensory and cognitive accessibility. Original drawings and photographs and 3D reconstructions of buildings and their surroundings are some of the resources to make more accessible specialized historical knowledge. These social spaces have been rarely fully represented in architectural journals, and if so, by fragmented images, making ambiguous the comprehension of the buildings addressed to socialization and encounter for a reduced and affinity community. Seeking new forms of dissemination of research that traditionally have limited access, we have selected the spaces whose rationale is focused on specifying both socialization and exclusion in an ambivalent way. The challenge we have set ourselves is under construction. Therefore, more than conclusions, we present here some of the reflections that the process has given rise to. We start from an interest in knowing the solutions that in the mid of the 20th century promoted the creation of new public and private spaces of socialization, which seek integration with nature and their suitability for the development of cultural, recreational, and sports that contribute to the improvement of the physical and mental conditions of the population, among which are social clubs. The projects that are still considered paradigmatic today have in common the inclusion of nature, the relationship with the geography in which they settle, the response to the climatic conditions of the site, the constructive coherence, the spatial flexibility, and in a few words, the search for a sustainable architecture over time. Among the national firms contributed to the construction of this architecture are Obregón and Valenzuela. They conceived flexible works adaptable to cultural and economic changes, works of impeccable tectonics that are still in good condition, in which climatic comfort and their relationship with the landscape constitute a characteristic hallmark. The documentation about modern architecture in Colombia and its potential as cultural heritage has been built in the last 2 decades. Colombia's exceptional built heritage buildings have been destroyed or dramatically transformed so that if they are not documented and disseminated, they will be forgotten as if they had not existed. In the critical review of these projects as architectural research groups, we have found an effective way to build a chapter of history that provides theoretical and practical references to the new generations who will face the drastic changes happening in the ways of inhabiting urban centers. However, as Jane Rendell points out, architecture demands to be understood in its production context, as well as in its consumption, representation, and interpretation context, end quote. The virtual exhibition allows us to reach a broader and more diverse audience, and it's constituted a virtual meeting space. However, it still needs to allow the interaction between the visitors as the one of the key moments of experience of the space. It implies a challenge for us to intertwine the socialization and the segregation social clubs represent. Thanks for the questions and comments on the email on screen.